There are journeys that are measured in miles, and then there are the ones measured in the silent, seismic shifts of the heart. We chart the first kind with maps and gasoline, noting the passage of towns and the changing of time zones. The second kind has no reliable cartography. It is navigated by the cadence of a shared laugh, the weight of a hand brushing against your own, the unbearable gravity of a secret held for too long in the quiet dark. You can drive for hours and go nowhere at all, or you can sit perfectly still in a parked car on a Tuesday night and feel the entire world tilt on its axis. That night, we took the long way home for no discernible reason, tracing the familiar veins of our sleeping city until the streets we knew by heart felt foreign and new, as if we were seeing them for the first time. And when Julian finally cut the engine, plunging us into a profound suburban silence broken only by the hum of a distant streetlight, I thought the journey was over. But it was only just beginning. We had driven past my apartment building twice. The first time, I assumed he was lost in thought, his mind still tangled in the chords of the concert we had just left, the phantom vibrations of the bass still thrumming in our bones. Julian had a way of getting lost inside his own head, his focus narrowing to a single point until the rest of the world faded into a soft, inconsequential blur. I had learned to navigate these silences, to exist comfortably within the space he created around himself. So I said nothing, watching the familiar brick facade of my home slide past the passenger window like a scene in a movie I was only passively observing. The second time, however, a quiet alarm began to sound in the back of my mind. It was a low, uncertain hum, the kind of feeling you get when a step you have taken 1,000 times suddenly feels unfamiliar beneath your foot. He was not a man who made the same mistake twice in the span of 10 minutes. Every turn he made after that felt deliberate, a conscious choice to extend the time we spent suspended in the warm, leather-scented bubble of his car. We drove through neighborhoods where the houses were larger, the lawns more manicured, the darkness more complete between the ornate lamps that stood sentinel at the end of long driveways. We listened to the album of the band we had just seen, the music filling the space my questions might have occupied, and I found myself studying his profile in the intermittent glow of the dashboard lights. The sharp line of his jaw, the slight furrow in his brow that signaled not worry, but intense concentration, the way his fingers tapped a restless rhythm against the steering wheel. He was searching for something, but it was not a street sign. Finally, he pulled over, not in front of my building, but on a quiet, tree-lined street a few blocks away, a place that held no significance for either of us. It was a pocket of stillness, a temporary pause in the world's relentless momentum. He turned the key, and the engine died with a soft sigh, leaving a silence that felt heavier, more intentional than any we had shared before. For a long moment, we just sat there, the echoes of the music fading into the upholstery. I could hear my own heartbeat, a steady, anxious drum against my ribs. I was cataloging the possibilities, running through the logical explanations for this strange detour, but my logic was failing me. He had not been drinking. He was not upset. The concert had been incredible, a shared peak experience that should have left us buzzing with a simple, uncomplicated energy. But this was not simple. This felt complicated. This felt like a threshold. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the confined space. He did not look at me. His gaze was fixed on the windshield, on the silhouette of a massive oak tree whose branches clawed at the starless, ink-black sky. "Leo," he said, his voice softer than I expected, softer than the night. I waited. I had become an expert at waiting for Julian. He took a breath, a deep, shuddering thing that seemed to draw all the oxygen from the car. Still looking forward, he finally spoke the words that would redraw the map of my entire world. "Can we just sit here for a minute?" He paused, and I could feel the tremor in the air between us, the vibration of a question held back. "And would it be okay if I held your hand?" The request was so simple, so gentle, it disarmed all of my carefully constructed defenses. It was not a demand or a proposition. It was a plea, whispered into the quiet space between two friends, a plea that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken conversations, 1,000 moments of ambiguous closeness. My mind, usually a frantic archive of analysis and overthinking, went completely, blessedly silent. There was no room for interpretation, no need to decode a hidden meaning. There was only his voice, the profound vulnerability in it, and the space between our hands on the center console, which suddenly felt like a vast and terrifying canyon. And in that silence, I felt the ground give way, the beginning of that slow, irreversible tilt. The journey home was over. The journey to whatever came next had just begun. Our story, like most stories of consequence, did not begin with a grand, cinematic moment. It began quietly, in the chemical-scented twilight of a university darkroom, a place of patient alchemy where images slowly emerged from nothingness. I was a quiet observer by nature, more comfortable behind a lens than in front of one, finding a strange solace in the act of framing the world, of capturing fleeting moments and pinning them to paper before they could evaporate. Julian was the opposite. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of creative energy and easy laughter that drew people into his orbit effortlessly. He did not just exist in a space. He inhabited it, filled it with his presence until it seemed to reconfigure itself around him. He was a software engineer by trade, a pragmatist who dealt in code and logic, but he had taken up photography as a way to, in his words, see the world in a language that wasn't binary. While I worked with a meticulous, almost reverent patience, he attacked his projects with a kind of joyful chaos, splashing chemicals, experimenting with exposures, and producing images that were raw, vibrant, and bursting with an untamed life that I secretly envied. We were assigned as partners for a final project, a portfolio meant to explore the theme of boundaries. I had planned a series of stark, architectural shots, fences, doorways, windows, exploring the physical lines we draw around ourselves. Julian, in our first meeting, had tossed my carefully outlined proposal aside with a grin and said, "That's good, Leo. It's clean. But what about the boundaries we can't see?" He spoke of the invisible lines between strangers on a subway, the space between two people before a first kiss, the emotional walls we build brick by silent brick. I was initially resistant, unnerved by his casual dismantling of my safe, predictable idea. But as he talked, his hands sketching invisible shapes in the air, his eyes alight with a passion I found both intimidating and magnetic, I felt a reluctant curiosity stir within me. He saw the world not as a collection of static objects to be captured, but as a living, breathing network of connections and near misses, of tensions and releases. He wanted to photograph the feeling of a thing, not just the thing itself. That project became the foundation of our friendship. We spent weeks wandering the city together, my methodical eye and his chaotic energy creating a strange but effective harmony. He would push me to get closer, to engage with our subjects, to break my own self-imposed rules of detached observation. I, in turn, would temper his impulsiveness, teaching him the patience of waiting for the right light, the subtle power of composition, the story that could be told in a shadow or a reflection. We worked in a state of constant, low-grade argument and deep, unspoken understanding. Our nights were spent in the darkroom, the rhythmic slosh of developer fluid a soundtrack to our conversations, which ranged from the technicalities of f-stops to the grand, unanswerable questions of what we wanted our lives to be. In the ruby glow of the safe light, with the rest of the world held at bay, we built a world of our own, a space where his extroverted confidence and my introverted watchfulness could meet and create something new. It was during those weeks that I fell in love with him. It was not a sudden, dramatic event. It was a gradual immersion, like stepping into a cool lake on a summer day. First the ankles, then the knees, then the slow, inevitable surrender to the depths. It was in the way he would look at a contact sheet, his head tilted, his brow furrowed in concentration, and then suddenly break into a wide, brilliant smile when he found the perfect frame. It was in the casual way he would drape an arm over my shoulder to point something out, a touch that was entirely friendly and yet sent a current of electricity through my entire body. It was in the moments of shared silence, when we would both be looking at a print floating in the fixer bath, watching the image solidify into permanence, and I would feel a sense of peace so profound it was almost painful. I knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that I could stand next to him in a dark room for the rest of my life. But I was the quiet observer. I was a student of boundaries, and I understood the delicate, invisible line that separated friendship from something more. I saw how easily people loved Julian. He had a succession of girlfriends throughout college, bright, beautiful women who were drawn to his light, and he was a good boyfriend, attentive, fun, affectionate. Watching him with them was a form of self-inflicted torture I became morbidly skilled at enduring. I would attend the parties, the group dinners, the movie nights, and I would play my part, the supportive best friend, the platonic cornerstone of his life. I learned to smile when he talked about them, to offer advice when he asked for it, to treat the women he loved with a genuine kindness that felt like a betrayal of my own heart. I packed my feelings away, storing them in a locked room deep inside myself, a room whose existence no one, least of all Julian, could ever suspect. I convinced myself that our friendship was too precious to risk. His presence in my life, in any capacity, was better than his absence. And so I became a master architect of my own internal fortress, building walls so high and so thick that even I sometimes forgot what I was hiding. Our friendship solidified after graduation, weathering the transition from the structured chaos of university to the ambiguous expanse of adult life. He went to work for a fast-growing tech firm, his days spent wrestling with elegant, complex code, while I scraped together a living as a freelance photographer, shooting weddings, portraits, and anything else that paid the bills, all while carving out time for my personal work, the quiet, melancholic cityscapes that were the truest expression of myself. We were the constants in each other's changing lives. My small, light-filled apartment became our unofficial headquarters, a neutral territory away from his work stress and my freelance anxieties. We established a rhythm, a comfortable pattern of shared meals, late-night movies, and endless conversations. He was the only person who understood the particular frustration of a shoot gone wrong, and I was the only person who could listen to him rant about a flawed algorithm for an hour without my eyes glazing over. He was with Sarah for most of that time, a relationship that lasted nearly 4 years. On the surface, they were perfect. She was a landscape architect, sharp and ambitious and kind, and she seemed to understand his energy, to ground him. I liked Sarah genuinely, and that, in a way, made it harder. It was easy to resent a phantom, an idea, but it was impossible to resent a good person who made my best friend happy. So I watched them build a life together, a life I could visit but never truly be a part of. I helped them move into their apartment. I went to their housewarming party. I took the photographs at her parents' anniversary celebration. I was the best friend, a role I had perfected, a role that was both a comfort and a cage. And through it all, the locked room inside me remained, its contents preserved, untouched, waiting. I told myself I was waiting for him to be happy, truly and permanently. But a darker, more honest part of me knew I was simply waiting. The shift began not with a bang, but with a slow, agonizing crumble. Julian's relationship with Sarah did not end in a single, dramatic fight. It dissolved over a period of months, a gradual erosion of shared futures and intimate connections. From my vantage point, I saw the hairline fractures long before he was willing to admit they were there. I saw it in the way his laughter became a little too loud at parties, a little too forced. I saw it in the increased frequency of his late-night texts, messages about work or a funny article he had read, but which I knew were really just signals sent out into the darkness, a way of asking, "Are you there?" without having to voice the underlying loneliness. He started spending more and more weeknights at my apartment, ostensibly to escape the tension, bringing takeout and a bottle of wine as a peace offering. We would sit on my worn-out couch, the television murmuring in the background, and he would talk around the edges of the problem, never addressing it head-on. He would talk about the pressure at work, about feeling adrift, about a vague sense that he was on a path he had not consciously chosen. He never blamed Sarah. In fact, he barely mentioned her. He spoke of his own life as if it were a foreign country he had woken up in, a place with familiar landmarks but an indecipherable language. I became his harbor, the quiet port in his emotional storm. I listened, I refilled his wine glass, and I kept my opinions to myself. It was a delicate, dangerous dance. Every fiber of my being yearned to reach out, to tell him that I understood, to confess that the life he was mourning was one I had never believed was truly his to begin with. But I knew that would be a selfish act, an attempt to insert my own narrative into his pain. So I remained the observer, the steady, reliable friend, the keeper of his unspoken anxieties. I watched as the light in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a weary confusion. He looked like a man who had been running a marathon only to realize he was on the wrong course. The vibrant, chaotic energy that had first drawn me to him was still there, but it was now frayed, turned inward, a restless hum of dissatisfaction that had nowhere to go. The night had officially ended. He showed up at my door just after midnight, without calling first. He was not crying. He was unnervingly calm, his face pale and drawn in the harsh light of the hallway. He held a single cardboard box in his arms, filled with a random assortment of his belongings, a few books, a framed photo from our college days, his favorite coffee mug. He did not need to say a word. I simply stepped aside and let him in. He walked into the middle of my living room and set the box down with a quiet finality. He stood there for a long moment, looking at the box as if it contained the entire history of his last 4 years. She said I felt distant, he finally said, his voice a rough whisper, like a ghost in my own life. And she was right. I did not offer platitudes. I did not tell him it would be okay. I just stood with him in the silence, bearing witness to the dismantling of a future. That night, for the first time, he fell asleep on my couch. He did not ask. He simply curled up under the afghan my grandmother had knitted, his body folding in on itself as if to make himself smaller, to take up less space in the world. I stayed up late, watching him from my armchair, the glow of the streetlights painting stripes across the floor. I saw the tension in his shoulders, the slight frown that lingered on his face even in sleep. And I felt a powerful, protective ache bloom in my chest, an emotion so fierce it almost frightened me. It was not pity, and it was not the triumphant satisfaction of a rival vanquished. It was a profound, terrifying tenderness. He was adrift, and I was the only land in sight. The invisible boundary between us, the one I had so carefully policed for years, had begun to dissolve, washed away by the tide of his unhappiness. That first night established the new ritual. It was a ritual born of his need and my silent acquiescence. The couch became his bed more nights than not. He would arrive after work, tired and drained, and we would fall into our old, easy rhythm of dinner and conversation. But there was a new undercurrent, a new weight to our interactions. The pretense that he was just crashing for a night quickly faded, replaced by an unspoken assumption that this was his secondary home. He left a toothbrush in my bathroom, a change of clothes in my closet, his laptop on my desk. My apartment, once my solitary sanctuary, began to reshape itself around his presence, absorbing him into its very fabric. The scent of his shampoo mingled with the smell of my darkroom chemicals. His chaotic pile of mail appeared on my kitchen counter. His running shoes were perpetually by my front door. It was a slow, quiet invasion, one I never resisted. The couch, however, was a temporary solution. It was old and lumpy, and after a week, he started complaining of a persistent ache in his back. He would groan as he sat up in the mornings, stretching with a wince that I felt in my own bones. I knew what was coming. I felt it approaching with the slow, inexorable dread of a storm building on the horizon. I had a queen-sized bed, a wide and comfortable expanse that I had always occupied alone. The thought of him in it, next to me, was both a fantasy I had entertained in my most private moments and a terror that threatened to undo years of careful self-control. I braced myself for the request, preparing my excuses, my gentle deflections. But he never asked directly. Julien, for all his directness in other areas of life, approached this with a kind of strategic obliqueness. One night, after a particularly long day for both of us, he was lying on the couch, staring at the ceiling. "My spine is going to permanently fuse into the shape of your lumpy cushions," he said, his voice laced with a theatrical misery. I laughed, a tight, nervous sound. "I could sleep on the floor," he added, almost as an afterthought. It was a masterful move, a statement that was both a joke and a test. It painted him as the martyr, willing to suffer for my comfort, while simultaneously highlighting the obvious, unspoken solution. "Don't be an idiot," I said, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. "The bed is big enough for two. Just take the side by the wall." And just like that, the line was crossed. There was no grand discussion, no negotiation of terms. It was a simple, pragmatic solution to a stated problem, a transaction cloaked in the unassailable logic of friendship. But we both knew it was more than that. The air in the room shifted, charged with a new, unspoken awareness. That night, as I lay in my own bed, my body rigid, my breathing shallow, I was acutely aware of him just a few feet away in the bathroom, the sound of the faucet, the soft click of the medicine cabinet. When he finally came into the bedroom, he moved with a quiet reverence, as if entering a sacred space. He slipped under the covers on his designated side, his back to me, creating as much distance as the mattress would allow. "Night, Leo," he whispered into the darkness. "Night, Julian," I whispered back. Sleep did not come for a long time. I lay there, listening to the sound of his breathing, a slow, steady rhythm that was so close, so real. It felt like a physical presence against my skin. I could feel the subtle shift of the mattress as he moved in his sleep, the warmth radiating from his body across the small gulf between us. My mind, my treacherous mind, was a riot of sensation and fear. Every nerve ending felt alive, hyper-attuned to his proximity. I was terrified of moving, of accidentally brushing against him, of my own body betraying the secret I had kept for so long. This was a dangerous new territory, a landscape of plausible deniability. He was here because his back hurt. He was here because he was my friend and he needed a place to stay. These were the facts, the solid ground I could cling to. But the truth was a far more volatile thing. The truth was that having him here, in my bed, was the most exquisite torture I had ever known. It was everything I had ever wanted and everything I was terrified of losing, all at once. The ritual became our new normal. 3, 4, sometimes 5 nights a week, Julian would end his day in my apartment, in my bed. The initial awkwardness faded, replaced by a practiced, careful choreography. We learned the geography of the mattress, the unspoken boundaries of our shared space. We developed a silent routine of brushing our teeth, of changing in the dim light, of settling under the covers with a quiet exchange of good nights. On the surface, it was roommate-like, a platonic arrangement born of convenience. But beneath the surface, a different language was being spoken, a language of proximity and unspoken need. I became a scholar of this new language, an obsessive interpreter of its subtle grammar. I learned the difference between the nights he fell asleep instantly, his body heavy with exhaustion, and the nights he lay awake for hours, his silent restlessness a palpable force in the room. The first time he touched me in his sleep, I thought my heart would stop. It was an accident, a simple, unconscious gesture. He had rolled over, his arm flung out, his hand coming to rest on the sliver of mattress between us. My entire body went rigid. I lay there, barely breathing, feeling the faint warmth of his fingers just an inch from my own. I did not move. I did not pull away. I simply existed in that state of suspended animation. My entire universe narrowed to that single point of near contact. After a few minutes, he shifted again, pulling his arm back, and the moment was gone. But it left an imprint on me, a phantom sensation that lingered for days. It was a crack in the careful facade of our arrangement, a reminder of the thin veil that separated our platonic reality from the potent, dangerous possibility of something else. As the weeks turned into a month, then 2, the accidental touches became more frequent. A foot brushing against mine in the night. his shoulder pressing against my back as he shifted. Each touch was a small explosion in the quiet darkness, a jolt to my system that left me wide awake, my mind racing. I would lie there, cataloging the sensations, trying to decipher their meaning. Was it truly accidental? Was he, on some subconscious level, reaching for me? Or was I projecting my own desperate yearning onto the random movements of a sleeping man? My internal monologue was a relentless courtroom debate, with Hope as the prosecutor and Fear as the defense attorney. Hope would present the evidence, the increasing frequency of his stays, the way he seemed more relaxed, more himself, in my apartment than anywhere else, the small, intimate details of our shared life that felt more like a partnership than a friendship. Fear would rebut, arguing that I was a convenience, a safe harbor, a temporary fix for his loneliness. I was a human security blanket, and to mistake that for love was a form of willful, dangerous delusion. The most potent and confusing part of the ritual was the talking. On the nights when sleep eluded him, he would turn over to face me in the dark, a shadowy silhouette against the faint glow from the window. And he would talk. He would speak in a low, quiet murmur, his voice stripped of its usual daytime confidence, rendered vulnerable by the darkness. He would talk about his childhood, about fears he never voiced to anyone else, about the nagging feeling that he was an imposter in his own life. He confessed that his job, which everyone saw as a mark of his success, felt like a gilded cage, a series of logical problems that offered no real fulfillment. He spoke of his relationship with Sarah not with anger or sadness, but with a kind of detached bewilderment, as if he were analyzing a failed experiment whose hypothesis was flawed from the start. During these nocturnal confessions, I would lie on my side, facing him, and I would listen. I would offer quiet affirmations, ask gentle questions, but mostly, I would just be present, a steady anchor in the dark. It was in these moments that the physical space between us felt both impossibly vast and electrically charged. I could see the faint glint of light in his eyes, feel the warmth of his breath on the cool night air. My hand would ache with the need to reach across the divide, to rest on his arm, to offer a physical comfort that would say more than my words ever could. But I never did. I held myself perfectly still, a statue of supportive restraint, terrified that a single misplaced gesture would shatter the fragile trust he had placed in me. He was opening doors to rooms inside himself that he kept locked during the day, and he was letting me stand on the threshold. To try and force my way inside felt like a violation. So I waited, and I listened, and I fell more deeply in love with the sad, confused, beautiful man who whispered his secrets to me in the dark. The turning point, when it came, was not in the darkness of the bedroom, but in the ordinary light of a Tuesday evening. It had been a difficult week for him. A major project at work had gone sideways, and he had been pulling long, stressful hours, coming back to my apartment hollow-eyed and silent. The restless energy that usually hummed beneath his skin had been replaced by a heavy, leaden exhaustion. He had barely spoken for 2 days, moving through the space like a shadow of himself. That night, I managed to coax him out of the apartment, insisting that what we both needed was loud music and the anonymity of a crowd. The concert was a welcome sensory overload, a wall of sound that vibrated through the floor and into our bones, temporarily shaking loose the anxieties that had settled upon us. For a few hours, he seemed like the old Julian, head thrown back, a genuine smile on his face, lost in the music. But the drive home was when the quiet descended again, a different kind of quiet than before. It was not empty. It was full, teeming with an unspoken tension that grew with every mile, with every deliberate, unnecessary turn he took. And then we were parked on that anonymous, tree-lined street, the engine off, the world outside held in a state of suspended animation. When he asked to hold my hand, the question hung in the air between us, crystalline and fragile. It was the first time he had ever requested a physical touch that could not be explained away by accident or convenience. It was a direct, unambiguous appeal. My hand was resting on the center console. I did not look at it. I did not look at him. I simply lifted it, a slow, deliberate movement that felt like it took a lifetime, and turned it palm up. It was an invitation, a surrender. He covered my hand with his, and the contact was like a lit match to dry kindling. His fingers were long and warm, his grip surprisingly firm, a solid, grounding pressure that seemed to drain all the anxiety from my body, leaving behind a pure, terrifying clarity. We sat like that for what felt like an eternity, his thumb stroking the back of my hand in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. The silence in the car was no longer empty or awkward. It was a vessel, holding this one perfect, unbearable moment. I could feel his gaze on me, but I could not bring myself to meet it. My own eyes were fixed on our joined hands, this impossible bridge he had just built between us. "Leo," he said again, his voice thick with an emotion I could not name. Slowly, I lifted my head and turned to look at him. In the dim, ambient light from the street, I could see the conflict in his eyes, the raw vulnerability that mirrored my own. He was not the confident, charismatic man the rest of the world saw. He was the man who whispered his fears to me in the dark, the man who was lost and searching, the man whose hand was now holding mine as if it were a lifeline. He took another one of those deep, shuddering breaths. "Can I ask you something stupid?" I could only nod, my throat too tight for words. He did not break eye contact. His gaze was intense, searching, as if he were trying to read the answer to his question in my eyes before he even asked it. The world outside the car, the trees, the houses, the distant city hum, it all disappeared. There was only the space between us, a space that was shrinking with every beat of my heart. "Would it be okay," he began, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a fragile thread of sound, "if I kissed you?" The question was not stupid. It was the bravest, most honest question I had ever heard. It was a question that offered me an escape, a way out. He was not assuming, not taking. He was asking for permission to cross the final, most sacred boundary. He was giving me the power to keep the walls of my fortress intact, to preserve the safe, painful status quo of our friendship. I could have said no. I could have laughed it off as a joke, blamed it on the emotional exhaustion of the week. I could have retreated to the safety of the role I had played for years. But looking at him then, at the hope and terror warring in his eyes, I knew that safety was no longer what I wanted. I wanted the truth. I did not answer with words. I simply tightened my grip on his hand, a silent assent, and leaned in. He met me in the middle, his movement hesitant, questioning, until our lips touched. It was not a passionate, cinematic kiss. It was something far more profound. It was gentle, soft, a tentative exploration. It was a question and an answer, a confession and an absolution, all in one. It was the taste of salt and uncertainty and a desperate, long unspoken hope. It was the feeling of coming home to a place you never knew you had been searching for. When we finally pulled apart, we did not speak. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed, and his breath was warm against my skin. In the quiet darkness of the car, on a street with no name, the world had finally, irrevocably, tilted. The boundary had been crossed. And I knew, with a terrifying and exhilarating certainty, that nothing would ever be the same. The aftermath was not the gentle dawn I had foolishly imagined. It was a stark, cold silence. The drive from that quiet street back to my apartment was a masterclass in unspoken tension. He did not let go of my hand, but the comfortable warmth of his touch had been replaced by a rigid, anxious grip. He did not look at me. He stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The easy intimacy of the kiss had evaporated, leaving behind a fog of uncertainty and regret that was so thick I could barely breathe. When we got back to the apartment, the familiar space felt alien, charged with the ghost of what had happened in the car. The choreography of our nightly ritual was shattered. He moved with a stiff, unnatural formality, avoiding my eyes, creating a physical distance between us that felt wider and more painful than the inches that had separated us in bed for the past 2 months. He took the side of the bed by the wall, as always, but this time he lay facing away from me, his body a tight, unyielding line. The usual whispered good night never came. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. The euphoria of the kiss, the soaring hope that had taken flight in the car, had crashed and burned, leaving behind the bitter taste of ash. I replayed the moment over and over in my mind, searching for a misstep, a misinterpretation. Had I leaned in too fast? Had I read it all wrong? Was the kiss not a confession, but an impulse? A moment of weakness born of his loneliness and my proximity? The questions were a swarm of angry bees in my head, and each one stung more than the last. I had allowed myself, for one brief, shining moment, to believe that my love was not unrequited. And the universe, it seemed, was punishing me for my audacity. I must have fallen asleep eventually, a shallow, restless sleep plagued by dreams of falling. When I woke, the other side of the bed was empty. A chill had settled in the space where he had been. I sat up, my heart pounding a frantic, panicked rhythm. The apartment was too quiet. I got out of bed and walked into the living room. His laptop was gone from my desk. His running shoes were gone from their spot by the door. His coffee mug, the one he had brought in the cardboard box on the first night, was gone from the drying rack by the sink. He had not just left for the day. He had erased himself. He had retreated, taking all the small pieces of the life he had built within my walls with him. The only evidence he had been there at all was the indentation his head had left on the pillow next to mine. A single text message arrived an hour later, a clinical, cowardly blow delivered from a safe distance. I'm sorry about last night. I'm so messed up right now. I need some space. I'm sorry. He was sorry for kissing me. He was sorry for crossing the line. I'm so messed up. It was not about us. It was about him. I was a symptom of his confusion, a casualty of his emotional chaos. I need some space. He was running away. He was running away from me, from what we had done, from the possibility that it might have meant something. The carefully constructed fortress I had lived in for years came crashing down, and I was left standing in the rubble of my own foolish hope. The pain was a physical thing, a sharp, twisting ache in my gut. It was not just the pain of rejection. It was the agony of losing my best friend. In one single, hesitant kiss, I had destroyed the most important relationship in my life. The quiet observer had finally acted, and in doing so, had shattered the very thing he had been trying to protect. The days that followed were a gray, featureless landscape of misery. The apartment felt cavernous, haunted by the echoes of his presence. Every room held a memory of him. The couch where he used to fall asleep, the kitchen where we would cook together, the bedroom that was now just a room with a bed that was far too big for one person. The silence was a constant, mocking companion. I tried to work, to lose myself in the familiar comfort of my camera, but the world outside my lens seemed flat and devoid of color. I walked the city streets, the same streets we had explored together for our college project, and every doorway, every window, every boundary seemed to taunt me with the memory of what I had lost. He did not call. My own texts went unanswered. I oscillated between a white-hot anger at his cowardice and a crushing, self-deprecating despair. I had been so stupid. I had mistaken his need for affection, his loneliness for love. I had been a safe harbor, and like all harbors, I was meant to be a temporary port of call, not a final destination. He had repaired his ship and sailed away, leaving me stranded on the shore. The worst part was the insidious voice in my head that told me I deserved it. I had known the rules. I had known the risks. And I had let myself hope anyway. After a week of this agonizing silence, something inside me shifted. The despair began to curdle into a quiet, steely resolve. I could not let it end like this. I could not let years of friendship, of intimacy, of shared secrets whispered in the dark, be erased by one night of fear and confusion. If our friendship was truly over, it deserved a better death than a ghosting and a 3-sentence text message. It deserved a eulogy. It deserved an honest conversation. I was done being the quiet observer, the passive recipient of his emotional whims. I had a right to an explanation. I had a right to look him in the eye and hear the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I could handle the truth. I could not handle the silence. The silence was a void, and in it, my worst fears were allowed to fester and grow into monstrous certainties. I drove to his office that Friday afternoon. It was a reckless, impulsive act, completely out of character for me, but I was past the point of careful consideration. I did not have a plan. I just knew that I could not spend another weekend staring at the walls of my empty apartment, waiting for a call that would never come. I parked across the street from the sleek, glass and steel building where he spent his days writing code, and I waited. It felt like a strange reversal of our roles. Now I was the one waiting for him, the one orchestrating the confrontation. He emerged just after 5, walking with his head down, his shoulders slumped. He looked tired, diminished, a pale imitation of the vibrant man I knew. He did not see me at first. He was fumbling for his keys, his attention focused inward. "Julian," I said. I had meant to sound firm, resolute, but my voice came out as a ragged crack. He froze, his head snapping up. His eyes widened when he saw me, a flicker of panic and something else, relief, in their depths. He looked like a cornered animal, unsure whether to fight or flee. He shoved his hands in his pockets, a defensive, closed-off gesture. "Leo," he said, his voice low, "what are you doing here?" "I think you owe me more than a text message," I said, and this time my voice was steady. "I think we deserve more than that." He looked away, his gaze falling to the pavement. "I know. I'm sorry. I can't do this right now." "When then?" I pressed, taking a step closer. The anger I had been suppressing was beginning to surface, a hot, cleansing fire. "When are you going to be able to do this?" "Because I can't live in this silence, Julian. It's not fair. You can't just open a door like that and then slam it in my face and walk away. You don't get to do that." He flinched as if I had struck him. He finally looked at me, and I saw the full extent of his misery. His eyes were shadowed, his face etched with a genuine, profound pain. This was not the casual cruelty of a man who did not care. This was the terrified paralysis of a man who cared too much. "You think I don't know that?" he shot back, his voice rising, cracking with emotion. "You think this has been easy? I haven't slept in a week. I can't think, I can't work. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in that car. I'm back in your apartment. I see you," and he trailed off, shaking his head, running a hand through his already messy hair. "And what?" I demanded, my voice softer now. "What happens when you see me?" He let out a long, shuddering breath, a sound of complete and utter defeat. "And I'm terrified," he whispered, the words barely audible over the rush of the evening traffic. "I'm terrified because what I felt in that car was not a mistake. It wasn't about being lonely or messed up. It was real, and it's the most real thing I've felt in years, and I have no idea what to do with it. I feel like my whole life, I've been following a map that someone else drew for me. College, job, girlfriend, the whole thing. And it was fine. It was a good map, but it wasn't mine. And being with you, especially these last couple of months, it felt like I was finally off the map. It felt like I was finally home. And the kiss, that just made it real. And I'm so scared, Leo. I'm scared of what it means. I'm scared of ruining the one good, honest thing in my life. I'm scared of ruining you." His confession, when it finally came, was a torrent, a flood of pent-up fear and emotion that washed away all of my anger, leaving behind a raw, aching empathy. He had not been running from me. He had been running from himself, from the terrifying, exhilarating truth that the life he had built was a lie and the future he truly wanted was an uncharted territory that he was afraid to explore. He was not a coward. He was just lost. And in that moment, standing on a busy city street, I understood that my role was not just to be his harbor, but to be his compass, to help him find his way. I closed the remaining distance between us. I did not reach for his hand. I did not try to touch him. I just stood in front of him, forcing him to meet my gaze. "You can't ruin me, Julian," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "The only thing that could ruin me is losing you. And we don't have to have all the answers right now. We don't need a map. We just need to stop being scared of the silence. We just need to talk." A tear escaped from the corner of his eye and traced a path through the grime of the city on his cheek. He did not wipe it away. He just nodded, a small, jerky movement. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay. We did not go back to my apartment. It was too freighted with the ghosts of our old dynamic, the scene of the recent trauma. Instead, we walked. We walked for hours, with no destination in mind, retracing the paths we had worn into the city's pavement over years of friendship. And we talked. For the first time, we talked with a brutal, terrifying, and ultimately liberating honesty. He told me about the suffocating pressure he had felt his whole life to be a certain kind of man, a pressure so pervasive he had not even recognized it as a cage until it started to rust. He talked about his relationship with Sarah, admitting that while he had loved her, it had been a comfortable, logical love, not a deep, soul-shaking connection. He confessed that his growing dependence on me over the past few months had confused him, that the comfort he found in my presence was deeper and more necessary than anything he had known, and that the realization had scared him. I, in turn, finally unlocked the door to my own secret room. I told him everything. I told him about the dark room, about the slow, gradual immersion into love, about the years of silent pining, about the pain of watching him with other people, and about the profound, unwavering certainty that he was my person, whether as a friend or something more. I laid my heart bare on the cold pavement between us, offering him all the pieces of myself I had kept hidden for so long. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever done, and it was the most freeing. As we walked and talked, the city lights blurred around us, and the noise of the traffic faded into a distant hum. We were in our own bubble, our own moving confessional. With every truth spoken, another brick in the walls between us crumbled. The fear did not disappear entirely, but it was no longer a monstrous, paralyzing force. It was just a feeling, one of many, and it was overshadowed by a vast, overwhelming sense of relief. We were no longer the unknowing initiator and the quiet observer, playing out our assigned roles. We were just Leo and Julian, two people who were lost and scared and profoundly, irrevocably in love with each other. By the time we finally stopped walking, it was late. We were physically and emotionally exhausted, but it was a good kind of tired, the clean, honest fatigue that comes after a long and arduous journey. We found ourselves standing in front of my apartment building. It no longer looked haunted. It just looked like home. He turned to me, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the lobby lights. The anxiety was gone from his eyes, replaced by a quiet, weary clarity. "Can I come up?" he asked. It was a simple question, but it held the weight of our entire conversation. It was not a request for a place to crash. It was a request to begin again. "Yes," I said, without a moment's hesitation. The new normal began that night. It was quieter, more deliberate than the old ritual. The desperate, unspoken yearning was gone, replaced by a soft, intentional tenderness. When we got into bed, there was no careful choreography of avoidance. He turned to face me, and I turned to face him, and in the familiar darkness of my bedroom, we just looked at each other, relearning the landscape of a face we thought we knew by heart. He reached out and gently tucked a stray piece of hair behind my ear, his fingers warm against my skin. It was a simple, proprietary gesture, an act of quiet claiming. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice full of a remorse that was no longer about the kiss, but about the week of pain he had caused. "I know," I said. "Me too." He moved closer, closing the small gap that had always existed between us, and wrapped his arms around me, pulling me against his chest. I rested my head in the hollow of his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, and it felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. There was no artifice, no plausible deniability. This was not about a sore back or a convenient place to sleep. This was about a fundamental need to be close, a need that was now acknowledged, accepted, and returned. We did not kiss. We did not talk anymore. We just held each other, and in that simple, profound embrace, I felt the broken pieces of myself begin to knit themselves back together. I fell asleep in his arms, a deep, dreamless sleep, safer and more at peace than I had ever been in my entire life. The days that followed were a study in quiet domesticity, a gentle exploration of our new foundation. The grand, dramatic confrontation gave way to a series of small, significant moments that were, in their own way, even more powerful. It was in the way he started leaving his things at my apartment again, not as a refugee seeking sanctuary, but as a partner building a home. His coffee mug returned to the drying rack, but this time it sat next to mine. His laptop reappeared on the desk, but now we often worked side by side, the quiet tapping of our keyboards a comfortable, collaborative rhythm. It was in the simple act of making coffee in the morning, moving around each other in the small kitchen with an easy, unthinking grace. It was in the way he started calling me on his way home from work, his voice on the phone not laced with weariness, but with a bright, open anticipation. "What do you want for dinner?" he would ask, and the simple, domestic question would send a ridiculous, joyful thrill through me every single time. We were learning a new language, or rather, we were finally speaking the same one. The subtext that had governed our interactions for years was gone. Now, a touch was just a touch, a look was just a look, each one honest and clear in its intent. One afternoon, I was in my darkroom, developing some prints from a recent shoot. He came in and stood behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. We stood there for a long time, watching an image of a rain-slicked street slowly emerge in the developing tray. His presence was not a distraction. It was a comfort, a silent support that made this solitary act of creation feel like a shared one. "I love watching you work," he murmured against my hair. "You're so patient. You see things no one else does." In that moment, I realized he was not just talking about photography. He was talking about us. He was acknowledging all the years I had waited, all the things I had seen in him that he was only just beginning to see in himself. Our story came full circle a few weeks later. We had gone out for dinner, a proper date, to a small Italian restaurant we both loved. The conversation was easy, full of laughter. We talked about the future, not in grand, sweeping terms, but in small, achievable details. A weekend trip we wanted to take, a photography project we wanted to collaborate on, the argument over whether to buy a new couch or keep my lumpy, memory-filled one. It was all so wonderfully, beautifully normal. On the drive home, he took the long way again. But this time, it was not a journey born of anxiety and unspoken tension. It was a joyful, meandering detour. He put on the album of the band we had seen that fateful night, and we sang along, badly and loudly, our voices filling the car. He drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on my knee, a casual, confident touch that spoke volumes. When he finally pulled over on that same quiet, tree-lined street, my heart did not pound with anxiety. It swelled with a quiet, certain happiness. He cut the engine, and the familiar, profound silence descended. He turned to me, a soft smile playing on his lips. "Do you remember this spot?" he asked. "I think it's permanently burned into my memory," I said, my own smile matching his. "Good," he said. He took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. The touch was just as electric as the first time, but the fear was gone, replaced by a deep, resonant peace. We sat there for a minute, our joined hands resting on the center console, the streetlight outside casting a warm, golden glow into the car. "I love you, Leo," he said, his voice soft but clear, with no trace of the hesitation or fear that had once defined him. "I think I have for a long time. I just took the long way to figuring it out." "It's okay," I whispered, lifting his hand to my lips and pressing a kiss to his knuckles. "You were worth the wait. The destination was worth the journey. We did not need a map anymore. We had found our way. The long detours, the silent nights, the fear and the confusion, it had all been part of the path, the winding, unconventional route that had finally led us home. We had learned to navigate not by street signs or fixed points, but by the steady, reliable light of each other. And in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together, we sat in the parked car, holding hands, with nowhere else to be. We were already there,